At the outset, I'll ask Councillor, I'd like, if possible, to share my time with Deputy John Lyons.
Agreed.
And I wish to move formally the counter-motion in the name of the Government. I'll ask Councillor and colleagues in the Dáil. The education allocation for current expenditure in 2012, including from the National Training Fund, will be €8,604 million. This represents about 17% of all current expenditure next year. Savings measures announced in the budget will provide net savings of some €76 million in 2012, increasing to some €241 million in 2013. Achieving savings in my department's budget has required very difficult decisions to be made, particularly at a time when the school-going population is increasing. We are dealing with a very difficult situation in the education sector, whereby we have to find savings and control the increase in public sector numbers, considering that 1/3 of all public sector employees work in the education sector. It is important to note that a key aspect of the EU-IMF programme of support and Ireland's overall budgetary strategy is a requirement to reduce the public sector payroll. This is particularly challenging in the education sector. Unlike other countries, our school-going population is rising rapidly. Places have to be provided for an extra 70,000 pupils arriving in our schools in the next 6 years. Teachers have to be appointed to teach them. Providing for increased enrolments is a key priority, but making some adjustment to teacher numbers is unavoidable, given the budgetary constraints. The net impact on overall teaching numbers in our schools has been minimised to the greatest possible extent. It is important that we have effective redeployment arrangements in place to ensure that all surplus permanent teachers are redeployed into vacancies in neighbouring schools. Despite the pressures on spending, the Government has shielded to the greatest possible extent frontline services in schools. There has been no increase in the mainstream staffing schedule general average of 28:1 for the allocation of classroom teachers at primary level. No increase. The overall number of special needs assistants and resource teachers will be maintained at current levels. Notwithstanding certain cost implications, my department has prioritised a reform agenda in certain key areas. Among the measures planned are implementation of the literacy and numeracy strategy, which will cost an additional €6 million in this current year, reform of the junior cycle, which will cost in this year an additional €1 million, the rollout of 100 Mbps broadband for second-level schools, which will cost €1.4 million in this year, a labour activation fund proposals to increase the number of places for jobless adults, and the implementation of the report on the Forum on Patronage and Pluralism. I want to turn now, I'll ask Councillor, to the general allocation model. The Department introduced a general allocation model for primary schools in respect of teachers in September of 2005 in order to provide additional permanent teaching resources to assist schools in making provision for children with learning support and higher incidence special education needs, such as mild general learning difficulty. Prior to the introduction of what is known as the GAM, schools have been required to apply for additional learning support resources based on assessments for each individual child with higher incident needs. The staffing allocation for many schools under the general allocation model has not been updated since it was first introduced 7 years ago in 2005. As part of the reforms to the teacher allocation process, it will now be updated for September 2012 for all schools through a redistribution of the existing resources. The combined resources available for GAM and language support, currently a total of 4,700 posts, will be used to create a single simplified allocation process to cover the GAM learning support and language support. This new single allocation for GAM and language support will be based on the number of classroom teaching posts in each school in the previous school year, i.e. the allocation for last year. The allocation for 2012-2013 school year will be based on the number of mainstream classroom teaching posts in the previous school year. This simplified approach will make it easier to automatically update it annually in line with the changes in the number of classroom teachers in each school. Schools will have autonomy on how to deploy the resource between language support and learning support depending on their specific needs. The single allocation process for GAM and language support will involve the allocation of the equivalent of around 4,100 posts as follows. An allocation of 5 hours per week, that's 0.2 of a post, to each mixed or all-boys schools for every mainstream class teaching post. An allocation of 4 hours per week, or 0.16 of a post, to each all-girls schools for every mainstream classroom teaching post, rounded to the nearest 0.2 of a post to facilitate clustering into full-time posts. I wish to confirm again what I undertook to do in December, which is to make some adjustment to reflect the particular position of DESH Band 1 schools in the new GAM allocations. The details of this will be notified to schools in the coming weeks as part of the Department's staffing circular to schools. The new GAM allocations are being done in 5-hour blocks, which is the equivalent of the tuition time for a full school day. Teachers that are in a shared post between schools can therefore operate local arrangements that enable their travel to a neighbouring school to be done where possible from the start of the school day, thus avoiding the loss of tuition time. The new GAM arrangements also provide for additional support to be given to schools with high concentrations of pupils that require language support. And let me turn to resource posts now and the allocations made by the National Council for Special Education. As part of the reforms to the teacher allocation process, existing posts will be used to put in place a network of about 2,450 full-time resource posts in over 1,600 base schools throughout the country that will be allocated on a permanent basis. This approach builds on the interim arrangements that operated in 2011, but in a more structured and transparent manner. The annual changes in resource hours at individual school level will only affect where the teacher is working on any one day, not whether the base school continues to host the full-time post. This approach will introduce a greater constancy in the context of the annual allocations and redeployment processes. The teachers in these full-time resource posts will undertake NCSE-approved low-incidence resource hours in the base schools or in neighbouring schools. Schools are typically notified of their NCSE-approved resource hours in the late spring, early summer period, but also throughout the school year. Through his or her role in allocating resources, the local CINO will have an oversight role in relation to the sharing arrangements between schools so that they can operate as efficiently as possible and any time lost due to travel between schools can be kept to a minimum. Schools that are unable to access their NCSE-approved resource hours from this network of full-time resource posts will be allocated mainly part-time temporary posts. I want to turn now to the staffing schedule for small primary schools. While there is no increase in the staffing schedule of general average of 28:1 for the allocation of classroom teachers at primary level, there will be a phased increase in the pupil threshold for the allocation of classroom teachers in small primary schools. As part of the budget decisions, the number of pupils required to gain and retain a teaching post in small primary schools would be gradually increased between September 2012 and September 2014. The schools concerned are those with 4 or less classroom teachers. It is important to emphasise that no small school will be closed due to the changes that have been announced. The phased adjustment is estimated to yield a saving of 250 teaching posts over the next 3 years, with 100 of these posts being removed in the school year 2012-2013. The resulting surplus teachers will be redeployed to vacancies in neighbouring schools in accordance with the redeployment arrangements. The phasing of these measures provides the schools concerned with time to consider the potential for amalgamation with other schools where this is feasible. We have a very significant number of small schools across this country. The interests of the House, there was once 6,500 primary schools in this country. There's now 3,200 mainstream primary schools. Let me turn now to guidance, budget measures and the guidance provision at post-primary level, which was the subject of some discussion. Guidance posts at post-primary level will no longer be allocated to any post-primary school on a next quota basis. That is, additional allocations for guidance provision will cease from September 2012. Guidance provision will in future be managed by schools from within their staffing schedule allocation. In this way, schools will have discretion to balance guidance needs with the pressures to provide subject choice. The budget measures, including those relating to guidance, come into effect from September 2012. Schools will be notified in the normal manner in relation to these changes. My department will be issuing a circular in January that will outline the staffing arrangements in schools for the 2012-2013 school year. Until now, a specific resource was provided for guidance in addition to the standard teacher allocation to post-primary schools. In future, schools must meet their guidance requirements, and they are statutory requirements, from within the overall resource provided by that normal staffing schedule. Individually, schools can continue to make provision for guidance and counselling. Decisions on how this will be done will be taken at school level in the best interests of students and to ensure the best use of resources available. And I'm confident that school management and teachers will continue to work together to meet the needs of the students in their care. The recent budget also provided for the filling of 300 assistant principal posts in second-level schools over the level originally planned. This will ensure that schools have sufficient management positions to ensure appropriate supports are available for all students, including yearheads. This is an important change which will reduce the impact of the moratorium on the filling of posts of responsibility in second-level schools. Principals will now have something that they have been looking for a long time. They will now have greater autonomy to decide the priorities as between subject provision and guidance counselling. I have no doubt that Leaving Certificate will get sufficient guidance, especially in January when they are filling in their CAO forms. Our schools are caring institutions, and I am happy that they will provide the necessary supports for vulnerable pupils in their care. All teachers have a duty of care to their students and not just guidance counsellors. Let me turn now to the question of DEIS. The Government will continue to prioritise targeted supports for schools with the most concentrated levels of educational disadvantage through DEIS, above and beyond other schools. We will continue to do that. In the region of €700 million continues to be provided for tackling educational disadvantage across the education spectrum from preschool to further and higher education, which includes schemes such as School Completion Programme and Disadvantaged Youth, now under the Department of Children and Youth Affairs, and the Schools Meal Programme under the Department of Social Protection. DEIS post-primary schools will be targeted for additional support through an improved staffing schedule of 18.25 to 1, which is a 0.75 or a three-quarter point improvement compared to the existing standard of 19 to 1 that applies in post-primary schools that do not charge fees, are compared to the 21 to 1 ratio which will apply in fee-charging schools. The Government is also providing €13 million in enhanced funding for DEIS schools, €2 million in school book funding for DEIS schools, as well as a €26 million investment in homeschool community liaison. All of these areas have been protected from reductions in expenditure in 2012. In addition, €27 million will be provided next year for the School Completion Programme, a major component of DEIS funded by the Department of Children and Youth Affairs. The DEIS Action Plan implemented in 2005 represented a significant advance in dealing with educational disadvantage, as it was the first comprehensive initiative in this area, developed by drawing in a coordinated fashion on appropriate data sources to provide indicators of disadvantage, which provided the basis for the identification of schools for inclusion in a suite of integrated supports under the programme. DEIS recognises that barriers to the educational progress of children and young people are varied and not just related to issues within the education system, and that the solutions will not just be found within the education system, but by the working in partnership with others across departments and agencies and the wider community. Prior to the introduction of DEIS in 2005, education and inclusion schemes had targeted additional supports to schools in disadvantaged areas under a range of uncoordinated measures. Among these were the Disadvantaged Areas Scheme, DASH, introduced in 1984 when Labour was in government, Breaking the Cycle in 1996 and Giving Children an Even Break in 2000, all aimed primarily at reducing class sizes. Through a lack of integration of the schemes at their time of introduction, some schools were included in all schemes, while others were either in some or just one scheme. Posts allocated under schemes that predated DEIS, which are the focus of the current adjustments, were retained by schools despite the fact that such measures were not warranted under DEIS. It was considered essential that the focus should be on preserving the core activities and resources applied to DEIS because DEIS provides for a more integrated and focused approach addressing the educational needs of children and young people from disadvantaged communities, from preschool through second-level education, in other words, from 3 to 18 years, supported by a much increased emphasis on target setting and measurement of progress and outcomes. The aim of DEIS is to ensure that the educational needs of children and young people from disadvantaged communities are prioritised and effectively addressed. Its core elements comprise a standard system for identifying levels of disadvantage, an integrated school support programme which brings together and builds upon existing interventions for schools and school clusters or communities with a concentrated level of educational disadvantage. Following comprehensive identification and review process in 2005 and early 2006, allowing for the inclusion of new and newly amalgamated schools and foreclosures, some 865 schools, that is 195 post-primary schools and 670 primary schools, are currently in the support school programme for DEIS. DEIS primary schools are subdivided into 3 classifications to reflect rural and urban status and the levels of disadvantage, which currently includes 199 urban band 1, as well as 144 urban band 2 and 327 rural primary schools. Over 158 million is being provided to provide additional resources and supports for primary and second level schools included in DEIS. And this support includes the following: a more favourable pupil-teacher ratio in band 1, additional capitation funding, additional funding for school books, access to the school's meals programme, access to numeracy and literacy supports and measures at primary level such as reading recovery, maths recovery and first steps, access to homeschool community liaison, access to school completion programme, access to planning supports, access to a range of professional development supports, access for school library and librarian support for DEIS second level schools, and access to junior certificate school programme and the leaving certificate applied. I have recently received, just before Christmas, 3 evaluation reports on DEIS which indicate that it is making a measurable contribution to improving outcomes for children in schools which benefit from it. Research and evaluation are essential tools underpinning DEIS, and my department has commissioned the Educational Research Centre to conduct an ongoing independent evaluation of the school supports programme component of DEIS in primary and post-primary schools to assist in successful implementation of the programme and assess and measure its impact while ensuring that the best possible approaches to measuring progress and outcomes are implemented, and any adjustments to the programme are made on the basis of the outcome from both research and evaluation process. The first evaluation I received, the second is in a series by the ERC, involves the evaluation of DEIS in urban primary schools with a particular focus on achievement in English reading and mathematics based on testing carried out in 2007 and 2010. The initial findings of the evaluation show that compared with the overall average reading score in 2007 with its equivalent in 2010, urban schools revealed an overall improvement in average reading and maths achievement. The improvements are statistically significant at all grade levels in both English reading and maths. Improvements are greatest at lower grade levels, with the largest gain among second-class pupils. Progress appears most marked among pupils with lower levels of achievement. Positive change in achievement is most evident among junior grades.
Just tell the Minister there's 10 minutes in the slot.
Thank you. In addition, the inspectors of the department undertook evaluation in a sample of 36 DESH schools, and the findings are quite supportive and significant. As a concessionary measure, when DESH was introduced, at a time when the economic landscape was much more favourable, schools were allowed to retain the staffing benefits that they had under these previous disadvantaged schemes, in addition to the resources provided under DESH. These include disadvantaged area schemes, breaking the cycle, giving children an evil break, and support teacher project. I would also remind you that schools not selected for DESH but operating under older schemes also retained teaching and financial resources from these previous schemes up to 2008 and 2009, when they were withdrawn on the budget from the previous government. A decision was taken to withdraw 428 posts from earlier disadvantaged programmes and schemes in 270 primary schools and 163 post-primary schools. 20 of these posts were allocated to the Professional Development Service for teachers working directly with schools, providing in-service relating to the implementation of literacy and numeracy under the National Literacy Strategy. Implementation of the Literacy and Numeracy Strategy 2011-2010 includes a commitment to support enhanced literacy and numeracy provision for students from socially disadvantaged, socially, economically and educationally disadvantaged backgrounds. For some schools, particularly impacted by the withdrawal of disadvantaged posts, a number of teaching posts are being held in reserve to reduce the impact of changes to schools most affected acutely by these measures. The special position of DESH schools will also be recognised in adjustments to the general allocation model, which is used to allocate learning and language support teaching posts to schools. All schools will be notified in the coming weeks of their staffing entitlements under the new arrangements, including any alleviation measures that may apply. This will allow schools to plan for the school year beginning in September. Conscious of the concerns of some schools that will be adversely affected by this measure, I have met with school principals, teachers, parents, communities in recent weeks to hear their concerns and to clarify the position in relation to changes announced under Budget 2012 to posts allocated to schools under previous schemes to tackle educational advantage. I have also held many meetings with members of my parliamentary party and indeed all government colleagues who have performed an invaluable service in allowing me to develop our understanding of the actual impact of the proposed measures on these schools. Consequently, I have asked my department for a report within the next 4 weeks on the position of DESH Band 1 and DESH Band 2 schools who currently have posts under older schemes in the context of the staffing allocations due to issue to all schools in the coming weeks. I have attempted to make it clear at all stages that we wish to examine the exact situation as it pertains to each individual DESH school on a case-by-case basis. This report is the next step in that examination. So let me conclude. As we have stated in the counter-motion before the House, I want to place on the record my admiration and appreciation of the extraordinary commitment, dedication and affection which is involved in alleviating educational disadvantage within our schools. The work in particular of teachers, principals, staff, parents and wider school communities in ensuring the continued success of the DESH scheme and the education of so many children from disadvantaged homes and communities. This work allows children to experience a genuine equality of opportunity that was denied to too many children in this country for too many years. Las Ciancórla, my personal commitment and the stated objective of this government is to continue working to develop strategies that will strive to eliminate educational disadvantage from our society. I hope that all DESH Band 1 and 2 schools will be assured of our commitment to resolve the current issues within the timeframe I have outlined. After all, we have an honourable record in democratic politics and particularly in the area of education. It is my intention to live up to that record.